Welcome once again to Captain Fred's Aviation Theater. Today we have Manuel Sparks, who is known as Sparky, with us, and he has his Pete and Pole air camper. It's a real delicious airplane. Sparky, first of all, let's talk about some of the performance of this airplane. What is the takeoff roll?
Oh, the takeoff roll with one person is probably about 100 feet.
Very short.
Yes.
And at what speed would you rotate?
About 30-35 miles an hour.
Very slow.
Very slow.
And your climb out rate?
Climb out rate is it's a very steep angle, but it's less than what it looks. It's probably with a big engine, it's probably close to 1,000 feet a minute.
And at what speed would you climb out?
Climb out about 60 miles an hour.
Okay. And cruise?
Cruise is about more comfortable, about 75 to 80 miles an hour.
At what RPM?
Well, the Continental engine at about 2,300 RPM or 2,200 RPM.
2,200 RPM, 75 miles an hour?
Yes.
It's a fun airplane. How much does it weigh? 600, 700 pounds?
It weighs about 650 pounds.
Almost an ultralight.
Almost, almost.
And is this one made out of wood?
This one here is made out of wood. They were built both ways, chromoly tubing and wood, but most of the earlier ones were built from wood.
They didn't have chromoly back then.
No, they didn't use chromoly
so
then.
So most of them, you went to the lumber yard and built your airplane.
Built your own.
Yeah. Now, Bernard Pietenpole of Spring Valley, Minnesota, created this airplane in 1929. Would you tell our viewers about that?
Yes, he was a tinkerer. He was a young fellow, and he lived out in Spring Valley, Minnesota, or Cherry Grove, Minnesota, which was a smaller town with no post office.
His office and shop was in Cherry
Grove, Minnesota.
Cherry Grove, yes. But he lived in Spring Valley.
Spring Valley was the city that had any population to speak of. Mm-hmm. Cherry Grove was less than 100 people, so they used Spring Valley as an address.
And how did he come to make the first one?
Well, the story goes, back in the Midwest, everything's laid out on sectional lines, and to get someplace you had to drive east and north if you were going to the northeast corner. And so he decided, well, there should be an easier way. Just build an airplane and fly straight across. So he built the first one, which was a biplane. It didn't work out too well in 1923. And then in the late 20s, he built the Pete and Pole air camper and used a Model A Ford engine. And he eyeballed everything just by experimenting and eyeballing and changing. He got the airplane to where he wanted it. He only had 8th grade education, so everything was just try and experiment with. So it worked out very well for him.
In addition to the air camper, he built several other models. After the air camper, what else did he build?
He built a Pete and Pole Sky Scout.
A Sky Scout.
Sky Scout, and the first one had a Model T engine because Model Ts were very cheap then, but the Model A was more expensive. So for the people that only wanted it was a single place, carry one person, he put a Model T engine in it, which was very cheaply to buy then, and he called it the Sky Scout. And
with the Model T engine?
With the Model T engine.
I bought a Model T for $30. And I bought a Model A for $100. So our viewers need to realize when you say cheap, you mean cheap.
Cheap, cheap.
So the Sky Scout was one place,
yes,
and had a Model T engine.
Yes.
And what was next?
Then later he put some Model A engines in the Sky Scout. A lot of people went to the Model A when they could afford it because it had more horsepower. And then the Pete and Pole, he was an experimenter, and so later on in years, he tried some other engines, but he came up with one that when the Corvair came out, I believe back in the 50s or 60s, so he decided to use a Corvair engine. First he bought a Piper Cub and he put it on the Cub and it worked very well. So then he put it on the Pete and Pole air camper, and he was very happy with it because it was 6-cylinder and it was very smooth. And he liked that airplane very much, and it's still flying back in the Midwest someplace.
Well, the Pete and Pole would be similar to a Piper Cub, wouldn't it?
Yes, very similar, very similar.
So if the Corvair engine worked in a Piper Cub, it would work on a Pete and Pole.
They used many different engines on Pete and Pole. They even used a diesel engine at one time. And They used radial engines. They used a Lambert. I flew one with a Lambert engine in it, 90 horsepower radial.
You mentioned a Star.
They built one with a 1923 Star engine, which was a Continental engine. It was for a Star automobile, 1923. They used that, but it was underpowered. They used it in a single place Sky Scout. It was much underpowered.
Well, the airplane, you could use almost anything. You could probably put a motorcycle engine in it.
Probably could, just about anything, because
what was the airplane that down at the EAA, they put a motorcycle engine in it?
that was a Heath Parasol. It was a single place, had a 1923 Henderson motorcycle
Henderson motorcycle engine, that's right.
Yes.
Upside down, I believe.
engine. No, they left it upright.
Did they leave it upright?
They left it upright, but it only put out about the low, maybe 20 to 25 horsepower. And I flew it. It flew very nice, but it was underpowered.
What else would you like to tell our viewers about the Pete and Pole airplane? This is your second or third one, isn't it?
Yes, this is my third Pete and, well, it's a second Pete and Pole. I've had so many. I had Corbin Baby Aces too. They're very similar, but they're an open cockpit single place.
Now, your first Pete and Pole that I knew of was maroon and tan.
Yes, it was built very, more to the early drawings, only I used chromoly steel tubing in the fuselage of that and tail feathers, and I put a bigger engine in it, and I flew it for 22 years, and I gave it to my son. He's still flying it. It has...
Broke my heart. I told everybody that if you ever sold that airplane, I was going to buy it, and then you gave it to your son. It just broke my heart.
My wife wouldn't let me sell it, but she let me give it to my son.
Now, you told me something special about that airplane and the FAA.
Yes, to my knowledge, it's the only Pete and Pole that has been certified by the FAA for all aerobatic maneuvers.
A Pete and Pole certified for aerobatics.
Yes.
That is something special.
I did the demonstration for the FAA because they knew I'd been doing some aerobatics. And he said, make it legal, go up and do the aerobatic maneuvers, I'll enter them in the logbook, and then you'll be legal. So that's what we did.
Tell our viewers how you got into aviation, when and where.
Well, I first got into it in the Army during the Korean conflict, and a C-119 flying boxcar. That was my first ride, and that kind of set things going, I guess. That's
kind of like a big Cessna Skymaster, isn't it?
Well, it similar. It looks something like a Skymaster. It does, yes.
But it has twin booms.
And radial engines. And that was my first ride. That was about 1951 or 52. Then in 59, I joined a flying club back in Ohio. And then pretty soon after that, I got involved in the Experimental Aircraft Association.
The EAA.
EAA, Chapter 40 in San Fernando Valley at that time. And from there, I got fired up and started building. So I built a Corbin Baby Ace and rebuilt a number of airplanes. And then from then on, it was just build, build, build. So
now, what all have you built?
Let's see.
What was the first airplane you built?
The first one was Corbin Baby Ace.
A Baby Ace.
And then I built a original design type thing. It was a mid-wing single place.
That was of your own design?
It was another fellow designed it. And then after that, I rebuilt a number of airplanes. And then in the late 60s, I built that first Pete and Pole we were talking about.
The maroon
one with the wire wheels. No brakes. Still no brakes.
Now, it did have brakes, I remember.
It did have a brake.
You had a stick on the side that you would drag on the ground.
And a piece of rubber car tire fastened to the end of the stick.
I remember the tower told you had to have brakes.
Right.
So you put a stick on the side of it.
Drag it on the ground. And but it's still working that way. My son's still flying it with the outside brake. And
you're flying this one.
Yes.
Now, you bought this one in pieces or abandoned or something?
Yes, a friend of mine built it. I'd helped him a little on building it, and then he had a little accident, and I bought it just as salvage and started over and made it into the way I wanted it. And so I've been flying this one now for about 5 or 6 years.
And you added the horn yourself?
I added the horn. And the airspeed indicator.
The airspeed indicator.
Yeah.
Tell our viewers about the airspeed indicator.
Well, the airspeed indicator is I copied it from a picture of something back in the 1920s. It's a vane that the air blows against this with a spring on it, and the more air pressure blows against it, as the speed builds up, it pushes this vane back, and put some numbers on the side of a plate, which is on the wing over here now. And it works very well.
It works like a stall indicator.
It could be, yes.
Off of air pressure, the same thing.
Air pressure, yes.
And now when you honk this rubber bulb horn, can they hear it on the ground?
Oh yes, it's very loud. You can hear it at pattern altitude from the air.
Very good. Thank you for visiting with us today.
Thank you very much.
Sparky and his Peton pole. This is Sparky's lovely wife, Marilyn, honking the horn of a 1930 Model A Ford. The Model A Ford engine was the power plant for the Peton pole airplane. With us now is Les DeLine, and he has a Peton pole with an authentic Model A engine in it, like a Model A Ford, an antique Model A Ford airplane. Les, tell our viewers about the Model A engine in this airplane.
Well, this Model A is a 1930. It came out of an automobile, naturally, and was rated at 40 horsepower.
40 whole horsepower?
Yeah, it uses it all. Actually, it has a little bit more than that now. It's slightly updated in that it has more modern pistons, a little bit different cam, and a little higher compression than it had.
But it's a Model A engine that came out of a 1930 car.
Sure is, and there's the radiator right there. It's water-cooled, just
and
like your car.
it was the airplane was designed to use that Model A engine.
Yes, it was. And this airplane was, the thought in mind was that any farmer could build this airplane with tools on hand, and you buy the engine out of a junkyard and the wheels, the radiator, various parts, and so anybody could build one.
Now, there wasn't an FAA back in those days. There was a CAA.
I think, yeah, when this airplane was initially designed, they didn't even have a CAA at that time. That was 1930. I think they had a Department of Commerce, and CAA came along a little bit later.
So you could go to the lumber yard and buy the wood.
Right.
And you could go to Western Auto and buy the car parts.
Right.
And put it together in your shed and fly it.
Exactly.
And you actually fly this airplane powered by a Model A Ford engine.
Sure do.
Today.
Yeah. I don't go very fast or very far, but it gets you in the air. And
well, Eddie Rickenbacker's mother would love you. Tell us about the performance of the Model A Ford engine.
It performs as well as the one with the Continental, like Sparky has. Climb-wise, about 400 foot a minute, I would say, would be average, and it'll cruise 73, 75 miles an hour.
On a 40 horsepower Model A engine?
Yeah. And that's burning about 3 gallons an hour.
From what, Arco unleaded, or what do you use?
I don't like Arco because Citgo works a little bit better in this. It seems the Model A likes the cheapest gas you can buy.
Yes, it would almost run on kerosene.
Oh, it would.
Yeah.
It would. Not very well, but it will.
Yeah. You could mix kerosene and gas together. They told me when I bought my Model A Ford that if you ever get in a pinch, you can put a couple of gallons of kerosene in with the gasoline,
sure,
and it'll run.
Yeah, it will. On white gas, it'll run on anything.
What else would you like to tell our viewers about the airplane?
Well, it's one of the most fun airplanes I've ever owned. I've owned quite a few airplanes, and I have a couple others now. And this is just strictly an airplane to get you in the air, and your grins from ear to ear when you fly this airplane.
Now, do you feel the warm air coming back from the radiator?
Not really. In the summertime, you can't. They say in the wintertime you can feel a little bit of warm air coming through the radiator, and that was one of the reasons they put the radiator up front.
Oh, they did?
Yeah.
As a heater?
Well, yes. Bernie Pietenpol that designed the airplane is from Wisconsin, and most of these flew in the Minnesota-Wisconsin area in the early days, and they do a lot of winter flying on skis up there.
Yes.
So the radiator was a little bit of comfort.
Tell our viewers about when and how you got into flying.
I started flying at 16 years old in Van Nuys, California, and I had always loved airplanes since a very small child. My dad loved it too, and so it was easy for me to get in it, and bought an airplane as a teenager and started flying with the airlines when I was 20 years old.
You started flying with the airlines at age 20?
Yeah, I had a lot of time by that time, and this was DC-3 days, and
Who did you fly with?
the first airline was Blatz Airlines out of Burbank. They had
Blatz?
Blatz.
That's a beer, Blatz beer.
Well, also an insurance company, and this fellow wasn't related to either one, but anyway, he owned a DC-3, and we flew as all non-skids do. We did military charters around the country, and then I went to the Flying Tigers and was there about a year.
Flying Tigers is cargo.
Yeah, but we did a lot of passenger
Oh, is that
flying
right?
also, yeah.
Hasn't it evolved into cargo?
It started as a cargo airline,
Oh, I see.
but then they got into the military charter business also. And when I say passengers, I'm talking about MATS contract work. And then anyway, after that, flew for a non-skid called Universal Airlines. It was out of Burbank, and that was...
Now that's a movie studio.
Yeah, and the fellow that owned that airline, his name was George Batchelor, and he was well known in the airline industry, and we had C-46s and DC-4s that were passenger airplanes. And then I wound up with PSA later, and was with them from 1958 until U.S. Air bought us out in 1988, and I retired out of U.S. Air.
And now are you with the Antiquers or the EAA?
Yes, I am. I've been with the Antique Airplane Association since 1954.
And you fly your Pietenpol.
And I love it.
Now, you haven't had this very long, I understand.
No, about 6 months. So I haven't really got into winter flying with this yet. I haven't been able to check out the radiator to see if it actually helps.
Well, but in Southern California, winter flying is really a joke.
Yeah. Yeah.
Winter flying means that you put on a sweater.
I know, but, you know, yeah, I know. So that's true. That's why we live here.
Thank you very much for visiting with us today.
Certainly.
Les DeLine and his Model A Ford powered Pietenpol. We are now visiting with John Kerr, and he's going to tell us about the wheels on the Pietenpol. The original Pietenpol had motorcycle or bicycle wheels, John?
Yes, it did, and I was anxious to duplicate as well as I could the wheels and the appearance of the old Pietenpol. So I went downtown to a motorcycle salvage yard, and I found these old wheels. And,
These are motorcycle
wheels?
wheels?
These are old motorcycle wheels, and I selected them because the hubs are smaller. And modern motorcycles, as you know, have a large hub that really doesn't look authentic. So I found these old wheels with the small hubs, took out the internal parts and put in some bushings, and then I machined those brass hubcaps from sewer caps. And machined
Sewer caps?
Sewer caps. I cut the square nut off, and then cut some veins, some grooves to make the pattern, and then buffed them, and now they dress the wheel up. And then I painted them and put those little pinstripes on, and they look just like an old Pietenpol. They do slow the airplane down a little bit, but slow is where you're going anyhow.
But it's authentic.
That's right.
If you were interested in speed, you wouldn't be flying a Pietenpol.
That's for sure.
Yeah. What else would you like to tell us about your Peyton pole?
Well, not only does it have the old motorcycle style wheel, but it has the straight through, what they call the grass cutting axle. In other words, it's just a straight piece of tubing that goes from one end to the other.
And when you land, you cut the grass
Mow the
off.
lawn. We mow the lawn when you come down. And then I carried the theme of the brass caps. I got a smaller one and made it into the gas caps for the covering the gas tanks.
Like a sewer cap.
Just like an old sewer cap, but it's a lot of fun. And on a day like this, it's a beautiful ride.
Well, thank you for sharing your motorcycle wheels
Sure.
with us today.
My pleasure.
As always, this is Captain Fred saying, I love airplanes and I honor the people who fly them. And today, it has been Bernard Peyton-Pohl's Air Camper. Well, that's our show for today. We hope you enjoyed it. We certainly enjoyed bringing it to you. I'd like to thank the San Diego Aerospace Museum, the first place to visit when you come to San Diego, for bringing aviation theater to you. Until next week, this is Captain Fred saying, God bless America and happy landings!